And too many times I hear people saying, I can't believe a nurse would do that. I would never do that. That's a nurse, they know better. But we have too many things that we're involved in. There's always kind of that list of your priorities, and you have to choose a cutoff at some point of saying, I can only do this much, and everything below that is going to be subpar. And that's not acceptable with some high-risk processes. So for me, that's been a big focus of mine, is to help them see the importance of we're going to do this process one way.
Hey, and welcome everybody to A Quality Podcast. We are here today with Clinton Pope. Clinton has a background in industrial engineering and is currently with the Department of Defense. So Clinton, I believe you have 4 boys, 1 girl, and you're Chief of Quality Management. You're in Germany. That sounds like a lot going on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
For sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. So I've been here in Bavaria, Germany for 3 years. It was really quite an adventure. Right before coming here, was working for a healthcare system in Arizona, and just somehow had this great idea that I would move overseas. And so started looking for jobs in Italy and Germany and other places. And this job with the DoD popped up. And basically I'm here doing performance improvement, quality management for a healthcare organization, treating U.S. soldiers and their families. So it's really been kind of an awesome opportunity. I served active duty myself. I was a combat medic back quite a few years ago. And so it was great to get back working with service members and helping to improve quality for them. But yeah, we just had our 5th child 5 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Very
so
excited
wait,
to have a girl.
So was the 5th one the girl?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
So you can stop now. That's what we're saying?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
I also just turned 45, so I'm sitting here thinking, what in the world did I do? But very happy to have a little girl in our home.
Well, congratulations. That's exciting. So basically what I got out of that is the Germans don't let our soldiers use their healthcare system. Is that...
Well, actually, they actually do let us use their healthcare system quite a bit, but we maintain basic services for primary care and some specialty care. But in the area that I'm in, we don't have a hospital. That's over on the other side of Germany. And so for any kind of emergency care or surgery or labor and delivery, we use the German healthcare system for those things.
How's your German?
Horrible.
Yeah,
I work on a military base with other Americans, and so I can go to the grocery store and I can pay for groceries. I can order bread from the bakery, but that's about it.
So what I got out of that is the Germans aren't very civilized. They don't have a lot of health care, so we have to supplement. Is that what?
No, not exactly. Germans
not
actually.
Reading that right?
No, I knew nothing about Germany before coming here. I'd never really been outside of the country other than when I was active duty. I deployed to Iraq, but to out of the blue decide I was going to move my family overseas was a little crazy. And we got here completely unprepared, thinking, what in the world are we getting into? But Germany has been incredible. The people here are so friendly, so nice. They are very civilized. Healthcare system here is actually very advanced in Germany, and I'm in Bavaria. It's farming country, and so everything closes down early. They don't have some of the conveniences we're used to in the U.S., but Germany is actually very advanced in a lot of ways. They've got a great system here.
So let me ask you.
Make some good cars too. So.
Oh, this guy will talk about cars the whole episode if you let him. So let me ask the deep question right out of the top. How do you add value to the healthcare process?
Great question. So in some ways, I struggled with that when I first got here. Like, what am I doing? How am I adding value to this? But we do really good with helping to assess how the organization is doing in terms of healthcare standards. So we followed the Joint Commission accreditation. We really focus on assessing the standards, understanding the risk associated with not following the standards, and then help the organization to meet those standards. We look at a lot of different data to understand where the risks are, and some of that is actual issues that we see. We have a patient safety reporting system where we hear from nurses and doctors and techs and people throughout the organization, and they'll report any kind of failure, whether it's something that they caught before it reached a patient, or if something actually reaches a patient, is there harm involved? Is it a no harm event? And that data becomes very valuable to the quality team. So we will use that data to look at different trends. Are we finding issues with certain types of equipment? Are we finding issues with certain types of processes, procedures, whatever it might be? We use that data to understand where the risk is and where we can help the organization. So it's really about finding those gaps, finding those failure points, and from there, coming up with a plan to help them improve.
So what does that translate to as far as a day-to-day? What does that environment look like?
So day to day, it's really all over the place. So again, for the past 3 years, I was the program manager for process improvement or performance improvement. And with that, it was really helping different improvement teams and coming up with strategies for what to focus on. So there's multiple layers of that. Kind of at the top of that was doing strategic planning with the organization. So working with all the leaders and different people throughout the organization to come up with kind of our focus areas for the strategic look. What are some of the areas that we're struggling in? And with those focus areas, we would translate that down to different departments, different groups, and we would work with improvement teams on specific projects. So one of the issues that continues to come up in healthcare is properly identifying patients. If you, and this is one of the things that we focused on, if you're not really good at verifying who you've got in front of you, you can chart information on the wrong patient, you can perform a procedure on the wrong patient. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. And so throughout healthcare, there's an effort to properly identify patients. And so in that area specifically, I've worked with a team to just look at the different processes involved. What are the different times that you should identify a patient? If they're right in front of you, that's kind of the obvious one. But there's all kinds of other things of scanning things into a record or providing medical records, making sure that you're handing the right record to the right person. And so it was kind of fun just to work through those types of processes. But each day it's something new, just different process, a different issue that we're working on. But I'm more in a consulting role where I'm helping different teams of people to work through those types of improvements.
Good deal. Jake, I hope that answers your lengthy inquiries. So today we wanted to talk about systems thinking and applying it to business outcomes. So I love the topic. I think it makes sense, given your background, what you do now, to sort of think that way. I think in my experience with that, it's kind of been a constant struggle to get management to think in terms of systems and processes and outcomes, as the result of a system or systems of processes, right? It can get a bit complex. It's rarely complicated, but it's always complex, right? So when we talk about business outcomes as the result of systems and processes, what's sort of the burning thing in your mind when we talk about that topic that you wish everybody and all the business managers and the people you work with understood?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that a lot because you're right. In my experience, a lot of people don't really understand the systems approach. For me, and especially in healthcare, this is kind of touching on the principles of high reliability. And we definitely use that term a lot in our organization, where we want to be highly reliable. Some of the principles for high reliability is to take kind of that process and systems approach to quality and safety, and to create a culture where people aren't afraid of failure. They're not afraid of talking about failure. They're kind of preoccupied with failure. And in order to create that culture, you really need to focus, when there is a failure, focus on the system, focus on the process. If you focus on the person who failed, who messed up, you're going to inappropriately blame or shame that individual. And so this is something, especially in a military culture, not just healthcare culture, but Army culture, there's definitely a bias towards focusing on the individual. And so I wish that I could help leaders really understand the importance of removing all fear of failure. And focusing on the system is definitely, from my perspective, that's the right approach. Let's look at what structures we can change. Let's look at the things within that system that we can change. And that'll create a much better culture and allow people to deal with failure in a much healthier way.
Well, let me tell you, the military is not alone. A lifetime in warehousing, we have the same bias.
Yeah, I like that. I like the understanding of psychology, and I think, it ties in with the work of Deming and others. I think the aspect that really intrigues me, that I have some difficulty sometimes helping business leaders to grasp, is repeatability and reliability, which is to say, if you have a business process that is in statistical control, then you know what your outcomes are. And you are always better as a business that way, right? Obviously, it can support root cause analysis, problem solving, that sort of thing. But just the experience of the consumer, it does. You don't have to be good. You do have to be consistent, right? Nobody goes to McDonald's because the food is good. I don't think, right? But because there's a dollar menu and I can get through there in 5 minutes. People go to Chick-fil-A when the line is wrapping around the building. They know the line is going to be wrapped around the building. It's always wrapped around the building. But because of that consistency, they can plan for it or not, right? But what if you went to Chick-fil-A one day and you were out in 2 minutes and you came back the next day and you had to wait 15? That affects your experience as a consumer pretty significantly.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
talk a little bit, obviously in healthcare, I think it's probably more important than fast food. I don't know. But talk a little bit about repeatability and reliability in relation to systems thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough in healthcare. Medical error is one of the leading causes of death in the world. And so it's not a very reliable system, especially when you get into more of the high risk procedures and surgeries and things. I'm kind of lucky here where I'm ambulatory care and we have very low risk, but we still deal with the issues with reliability and repeatability. And this is one of the reasons that standards are so important. I think standards are often misunderstood, but we get standards from the Joint Commission and they're very broad. They're going to say this general statement, that you should use two patient identifiers. And that's kind of, for that one standard, that's really all it's going to say. And so we have to operationalize that for us. We have to say, well, what's our standard of work? What's our actual procedure that we're going to follow every time we have to identify a patient? And unfortunately, in healthcare, my experience is that we're not really good at defining that standard work in a way that it's translatable across the organization, that we can really give clear instructions like, here you go, these are the steps, this is a nice pictorial or whatever we want to give. We're not good at that. And we have so many of these complex processes, these high risk processes. And in a lot of ways, we're just doing the best we can based on our knowledge and our experience and our training. You're licensed as a nurse or a tech or whatever it is you're licensed at. And too many times I hear people saying, I can't believe a nurse would do that. I would never do that. That's a nurse, they know better. But we have too many things that we're involved in. There's always kind of that list of your priorities, and you have to choose a cutoff at some point of saying, I can only do this much, and everything below that is going to be subpar. And that's not acceptable with some high risk processes. So for me, that's been a big focus of mine, is to help them see the importance of we're going to do this process one way. We're going to be very good at following this standard work, developing that standard work. But I struggle with that every day. It's tough, especially here. The military changes over so fast. People are only here for 2, maybe 3 years. And then you're working with brand new staff again. Every summer is this transition of all the people leaving, all the people coming. And so every summer, it's like I got to reteach the same things over and over. And so I can only get so far. But repeatability, reproducibility is very difficult in healthcare. And I definitely struggle a lot with that.
Well, I like that everything you said is exactly applicable in the warehouse. Step one, every critical process that has failure, you have to engineer capacity into it. If I need 10 people to load 10 trucks to hit my 100 for the day, take an 85th percentile, give me 12 guys. And then when they're at that crunch, I actually have capacity engineered to not. Now, nobody's life is on the line, in a warehouse, but the same theories all still apply. So then secondarily is my turnover is over 100%. My constant focus is we have to have a platform where we consistently re-engage the same basic training. Stuff that you would hear and go, well, I know that. Why are you training a whole group of people on that? But it's absolutely required given, the field and the world that we live in. So well said.
Yeah. One thing that's funny is that in a plant or in what did you say, warehousing or,
in the logistics space.
Yeah, you see a lot more engineers, you see a lot more technical people, and healthcare is really only barely getting there. Most people in my job, in my role in performance improvement, are a nurse that's happened to go to a 4-week Lean Six Sigma course. And so they don't know quality the way an industrial engineer knows quality, or other engineers for that matter. And so in healthcare, there's not enough of the technical individuals that really understand statistics, understand quality control, that can approach quality the way an engineer will. And in some ways, I'm boasting in saying that because I'm very proud of my industrial engineering education and what I can do with that. But healthcare is just barely starting to pick up. A lot of organizations, I actually just recently interviewed with Banner Health in Phoenix, and they've got a whole team of industrial engineers. And it's awesome to see that. And some of them have been in healthcare for 30 years. And so some organizations have embraced that and have done well with it. But it's still, even for them, it's very difficult to share some of these practices. Whether it's standard work or any of the other lean type practices, we struggle to get the buy-in with other healthcare professionals.
Yeah, I like the call out, and I think it applies to almost every industry outside of manufacturing, probably, and probably needs to be said, which is, the engineer has a level of knowledge, right, that significantly outstrips anything you get in one of these, black belt courses. And I know because I have both, right? So the type of math and physics modeling and statistical modeling that I had to understand, to get my black belt was kind of like freshman year stuff, honestly, right? And that's okay. But if you're running a large organization and you're trying to implement lean or a quality management system or anything in the technical or systems realm, right? It's kind of up to us, and I say us, I guess, me in the consulting space to kind of educate them. You can't just go hire somebody that has a black belt and get what you need. You know, you have to have people that can engage and talk to other people, but you definitely have to have people that have the technical knowledge and skill to actually help you out. And there can be some overlap. There can be people that are educated and skilled in engineering, that have a black belt certification, for example, and know how to work in that kind of org. I've got several friends that fall into that category. They work for General Electric, or they did. I don't know what's happening to GE right now, but
Is that still a company?
no, it's going to be three companies now, and I don't know what there's going to be like General Aviation, General something else. They got rid of the lighting division last year. I thought that was like, that was like a Chevy Camaro. Like they're never going to get rid of that, but they did. Um, but anyway, I appreciate your modesty, but I think it needs to be said, and I have to educate people in that, frequently, which is, you know, don't buy the hype, if I can put it that way. Just because somebody has a black belt, it's nowhere close to the level of knowledge and education that you get out of an engineer. So,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I always use
it's a good call out.
I always use the metaphor that me as an industrial engineer, especially having a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering, in the medical world, that's equivalent to, say, a nurse practitioner who can practice medicine with their own license, or a physician's assistant who can practice under a doctor, and then asking them, say, you are a provider, you can do all these things, but we want you to get licensed as an EMT basic.
Right.
That certificate is really important to us. We want you to get that certificate. And I just wish I could give them what I have in my mind and say, I'm an industrial engineer. That kind of trumps any kind of lean Six Sigma or anything else. Yeah. And, yet I've got the black belt because people want to see that. And, but yeah, it's such a vast difference in knowledge, especially when there's not really any standardization when it comes to Six Sigma training. I can go through the Army system in 4 weeks in a project, and I'm a black belt. With me to earn a Lean Six Sigma black belt through Arizona State University, I had to take 4 master's level courses and do a massive project. It was a 30-page project. It went through evaluation process. And to me, I thought, okay, this Lean Six Sigma stuff must be a pretty big deal. And then I get out in the real world and realize other people are getting a black belt certificate in 4 weeks without the statistics that I had to learn, without all this, production management and quality management courses that I took. A lot went into that. And I thought, oh, I guess maybe this Lean Six Sigma thing is not as cool as I thought it was if somebody else could earn it in 4 weeks. So yeah, I definitely have my opinions when it comes to Lean Six Sigma. I was very proud when I did it. When I got that certificate, I was happy to get it, and I've done a lot of stuff with that knowledge. But others get the same title with a lot different process. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the lack of standardization, it continues to be a problem. We have to look at where credentials come from. But really, for me, working in lean and continuous improvement, with companies, the proof is in the pudding. I don't put nearly as much weight on somebody being credentialed as what have you done? If you haven't done anything yet, okay, well, let's talk about how you can create value, and you're going to practice on us. I get it. And you're going to get paid commensurately. Um, but if you've worked with an organization and, developed value and can kind of demonstrate your projects and prove your worth, then great, you know, because I've worked with, you know, educated idiots, and I've worked with very successful and shrewd uneducated people. But the McDonaldization of lean thing is very real, and there's a lot of folks making money, um, kind of ripping people off. So it just is what it is, I think, right?
That is part of the inspiration behind the brand. You will not believe how many people are in the Six Sigma world. They're connected to me, and then they post something that is just not even logical. It's not pragmatic. It's not logical. Doesn't exist in objective reality. Or then they go one step further and try to like introduce some sort of esotericism to like the Lean Six Sigma process, and I'm like, you just don't know reality. You just don't know.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
the adding too much value thing, like, hey, I'm creative. I thought of something new, honey. Let me tell you something. Winslow Taylor wrote that down and has since been corrected 19 times. Okay, so you need to stop. And then there's the guy who's like, well, actually, let me tell you what it really means. Like, yeah, I'm looking at what you're writing, and then I'm looking at my textbooks and courses from MIT, and they all disagree with you, so I'm going to go with these guys over here. Um, you definitely have some of that in the industry right now,
Yeah,
which
I love the spaces where you've got these discussions going on, and there's always, some people are coming into this just learning it, and they're so excited about it, and they want to share, and they want to say all these things, and it just becomes really obvious that they've got, an education that they paid a lot of money for. They get the certificate, but they're lacking so much when it comes to real world exercise and how to apply it.
Yeah, and a couple of the loudest voices in the world in our field are academics who, like, they're a professor at a school, or they haven't been inside an operation they're talking about since I've been alive. And they're trying to argue the finer point about how this problem should be addressed. I'm like, well, if you would get out and be in the working conditions, you would have a completely different opinion here.
well, it's an interesting point because we know that the connection between theory and reality is the people, right, who embody whatever you're trying to do, right? Unless you're a computer scientist, in which case, have fun. Um, so there's no doubt that for the generation that grew up with the internet, which is a lot of the folks entering the workforce now, um, they think and behave differently. The core human psychology remains the same, but just the way they frame problems and think about things and, where am I going to look for stuff is different. Um, I worked at a factory that was probably 90, I'm going to say about 90% white male over the age of 50, old union shop. And, they had this thing going on where it was like, don't make things too safe for me. I'm not a pussy, right? Don't give me any fancy stuff. I want my standard work, written in on the side of my toolbox with a grease pen, that sort of thing. Well, it was cultural. And I remember one of the managers who had come up through the ranks in tool and die talking about, in 1954, I was right here in this room when somebody threw a wrench at me because I screwed up, you know. Well, now contrast that to folks that I'm hiring right now, and they kind of, you know, aren't good with the standard binder. You remember, like, everything used to be a binder. It had tabs, right? Tab 1.1 had a topic. You'd open that up, and it would have like 1.1a, like standard binder. They're not good with it. Like, their brain is hardwired differently. But if I put it on a touch screen, it can even be just a Microsoft PowerPoint, with linked, what do we call it, internal hyperlinks. Man, they get it like that. And so,
Yeah.
like, things are changing, and it's up to us, as change leaders, to come to terms with where people are at and empower them where they're at, not try to force them to be something they're not, right?
Yeah. Well, in my working environment, we've still got the wide mix of generations. We've got a lot of young people who are good with technology, who can get into these systems and take full advantage of them. And yet we've got a lot of old timers who are retired active duty, and they're still just working now as a civilian, and they don't know how to do anything in Excel or any of the tools that are so valuable, especially in the quality world. And I just wonder, how are they still doing it? But they've got this knowledge, right? They've got all this experience, and so it does become a challenge of how do you work with these generational gaps when technology has changed so much over the past 10, 15, 20, 30 years. It's amazing. And I see that with my kids. They all have their own iPad, and they're, can do amazing things on this iPad. That's their world. That's all they know. I rented a car a few years back, and it was actually coming here. I had to ship my car. They actually will ship my car from the US all the way over here to Germany. And so I took it to a port in San Diego, and I rented a car to come back. And my son, who is with me, he's sitting in the back, and he says, "Dad, what's that knob?" I'm like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And I look back, and he's got a knob for rolling the window up. He's never seen one of those before. He's only experienced the button that you push. And I thought, man, this world that my kids are growing up in is so different in so many ways. And it's so easy to look back at these generations and kind of joke about the upcoming generations of how they just don't know how to use a binder. But there's going to be some great advantages to that too. And it's kind of tough to see past the, like, why can't they just get this way that we've always done it? But yeah, I definitely see that challenge in a lot of different ways. For me, what I always take this approach with systems thinking where I break it into kind of like a plan, do, study, act. But I've delved real deep into each of those pieces. What does it really mean to plan? What does it really mean to study? And you can look at that cycle from a macro perspective, like a strategic perspective, maybe over the next year or two for an organization. And you can look at that for day-to-day activities. They're for me, it's like a fractal. No matter how far you zoom in, you can keep using it at multiple levels. And so with that cycle, the study piece to me is about perceptions. It's about what we know and what we understand. If we don't take the time to really study the process, to understand the system, to understand the different inputs, to understand the different pieces of that system or process, we're missing a lot. And this goes into the generational gaps or whatever it is we're looking at in an organization. We have to improve that perception that we have through study, through observation, through being at the job site, by seeing firsthand for ourselves, by talking to those involved. And it's only with the more and more we study, the more we put into that we're prepared to recycle through that, to say, okay, with that knowledge that I have now, what can I plan? What can I improve? What are my targets? What are my standards that I'm trying to meet? And each time you cycle through that, you learn a little bit more and more. But I apply that to pretty much everything. That's kind of my leadership approach. That's my quality approach. I can use those principles in anything that I do. It kind of becomes a framework for me to help teach the principles, to help practice the principles. And so I always go back to those 4 steps: plan, do, study, act, and the depth of where I can go with that.
That seems to be your child rearing process as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I learned a lot. It's funny because just having a new baby in the house, we have a pretty big gap 5 years between her and her older brother, the next youngest one. And I've forgotten what it's like to have a baby. I forgot how little sleep I get and everything else that goes with it. But it's making me reflect back to when the boys were young. And luckily, I'm a lot more patient guy than I was back then. She's definitely going to be spoiled having me a little more experienced, a little older, a little more patient and willing to put up with some of the things that go on in the house. But absolutely, in every aspect of life, that simple process, that simple 4-step model, whatever you want to call it, it comes into play.
Yeah, the early months were tough. I remember having to check into a hotel so I wouldn't have to hear the kid. But
God.
yeah, what I love about PDSA, actually, most of lean when I
PDCA.
yeah, whatever.
Essay.
When I talk to
Whoa. Defend your argument. Why PDSA?
oh God. So
Why?
It's the old argument. It's Deming's own words that he preferred study. And when I look into it, the principle as a whole, and I actually can defend this pretty well, at least in my own mind. We'll see how it comes out in words. But check just doesn't do it for me. Check is too quick sounding to me. Check is look. But study, it means a lot more. It's a lot deeper look. You have to really put in some more effort. You have to learn a few things. You have to take some time and study not just the data, but the process itself. This is, going to the Gemba, going to where work is done. It's all involved in that study step from my perspective. So I definitely prefer study. Just it holds more weight in my mind than check.
Let's quote that Clinton has a problem with the check.
Yeah, and I apologize. Jake's just pulling your leg because we're making fun of a certain subset of our industry. So,
Gotcha.
But we are getting close on time, so I want to kind of draw us back in a little bit and get a few important points in. So, what I like about PDSA, most of Lean is a management approach that's designed to apply certain engineering principles to regular people and get them to behave in accordance with some principles of physics. And so it's very memorable. Like PDSA kind of sticks, right? But it's kind of just the scientific method. That's really what it is. And that recursive, reiterative approach, anybody that is engaged in physical product design. Now, I know software is a little bit different, but when you're designing a physical product, like this is what it is. Like this is your job. You're making ballpoint pens. You make the plan, right? You make the pen, you study the pen, and then you adjust it until eventually you end up with this Skillcraft U.S. government ballpoint pen that's perfect and doesn't have to change for 40 years. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not my experience with the pen.
No, I'll tell you what though, they're pretty.
Or the government.
Amazon.
Or the government, sure. No, you're absolutely right. That the scientific approach, and to me, I look for these patterns, right? This scientific method, the PDSA, the OODA loop. There's dozens of them out there. That it's the same principle, just in different order. OODA loop, you start with observe. That's really the study piece of PDSA. Mm-hmm. And then you go to orient, which is, orient is more about your aims. It's about the act piece for PDSA. But all of these different 4-step models really are the same thing, just from different perspectives. And I think it just depends on what you learned first, maybe. In healthcare, we definitely use scientific method a lot. And so I tend to go with that when I'm talking to nurses and doctors rather than PDSA, because they've never heard of PDSA.
Yep.
But I'll tell them about scientific method. I'll tell them about what they do every day. Hey, you assess a patient, and then you come up with some sort of diagnosis, and then you come up with a treatment plan, and then you see if they'll actually do it, and you follow up. It's the same exact principle. And we see this so many times in life. It's really all around us. It's how we learn. It's the theory of knowledge. And so many people try to make it into something more complex, but it is just that simple. You just go through an iterative cycle, and you're going to see the same principles repeated over and over again.
That's what I'm poking fun at.
This is where it really hits home, going through that conversation, which is for people who understand the theory, you can recognize your audience's vocabulary and what they're comfortable with, and use that to your advantage to get the outcomes you want. If you don't understand the underlying theory, then you're a slave to methodology and tools. And this is, definitely that McDonaldization of lean thing that we were talking about earlier, right? You can't come in and help this company by doing a 5S event. It has no context. It doesn't mean a damn thing. What are they actually doing? How are they creating value? How does that process work? Where's the waste in the process? You can't do, 5S is visual workspace management theory anyway. How can you do that if you don't understand this, right? So I like how those threads kind of pull together. And to me, what you're doing in your role with service members, as well as healthcare professionals who are service members, and the different education, background, vocabulary, and then you with your engineering background, I think really demonstrates the power of understanding and learning theory and really internalizing it and learning how you can apply it in different contexts, as opposed to, color by number type of approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Healthcare needs a lot of help. And if you know anybody in the quality world, in the lean world that has any kind of inkling to get into healthcare, there's a lot of help that's needed. We look at these great high reliable organizations like aviation or nuclear or whatever. We look at these organizations, we try to learn from them, and healthcare is like, we want to become a HRO, we want to be a highly reliable organization. And yet they really miss the boat in a lot of sense because they don't have that knowledge set. They come, very smart people. When you talk about doctors and nurses, very smart people. And so, yeah, how do we get those technical folks to help out, to come into healthcare, to help share those things and bridge that gap? Because it's a big bridge right now. It's a big divide between what healthcare is doing and what other industry professionals are doing when it comes to quality. But it's just a unique challenge that the world's got to solve in some way when we still are performing surgeries on the wrong leg, chopping off the wrong leg, or performing a procedure on the wrong person. It just blows the mind, the type of error that we continuously see in healthcare. And so it really just comes down to that knowledge gap, and that gap in education. And I guess until they start teaching those principles to doctors and nurses, I think in a lot of ways we're going to continue to see these types of issues. But I don't know, to me, the systems thinking approach is something that can help. In my mind, I see the pathway to getting there, especially simple principles like Plan, Do, Study, Act. But it's teaching it in such a way, it's sharing it in such a way that healthcare professionals will really take hold of it. That's really the struggle.
Yeah, that's always the struggle, right? Regardless of industry, the communication with real humans, the buy-in, all of that. And kind of listening to you talk through it, I'm wondering if we're just not doing it wrong, like society, culture, and business in general. Like, I'm smart too. If you let me do brain surgery on you, you're an idiot, and so am I, right? I don't know how to do that. It's no big deal. There's a limit to everybody's fields, right? Um, so maybe in the future, we'll have people who are good at different things that work across organizations. Why should a hospital system or a healthcare system have W-2 employees that are engineers that maybe specialize in healthcare? Maybe that's kind of difficult from a budget standpoint. Uh, but what if you had a team of engineers and they work with multiple healthcare systems and organizations and hospitals? In the same way, doctors, should I be the employee of a hospital? How does that relationship look? If you go to other, mostly non-Western countries, the dynamic is totally different, and even in America at different times in our past, the dynamic has been different, right? But I'm thinking of, where was I? In Thailand, right? So basically there's like the one doctor for this whole region, and he was riding around on an elephant, um, or maybe that was just for the tourists, I don't know, but he rides a donkey most of the time, but when the tourists show up, he rides an elephant. But anyway, riding from village to village, like in a circuit, caring for people, right? Because it's more efficient with the resources they have, et cetera. And so I just think through, like, speaking of systems, what kind of forces are in play in our culture, et cetera, that have forced us to do things in maybe suboptimal ways? Like the whole W-2 thing and the way the IRS is structured, that's a problem, right? Um, why are hospitals competing with each other? That doesn't seem to be in the spirit of what you do for a living, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, but I think the future might look different.
Yeah, I like that that you pointed out the forces though, because I think a lot of people in systems thinking forget about that. We spend too much time talking about boundaries of a system or parts of a system or inputs and outputs. But the driving force is really where it's at. That's what's going to cause things to line up the way they do. That's going to create the flow to the system, whatever kind of force there is. And I look at a lot of quality professionals in healthcare, and I'm always looking at job postings, whether I'm trying to change jobs or not. I just like to keep an eye out there. And one of the trends that I see is most quality positions in healthcare, they require that position to be held by a nurse. They want somebody with a nursing license. And I wish that's one thing that I wish I could change, to say, it's great to have clinical people in quality. They have a different perspective than an engineer is going to have. By all means, have a mix of nurses and other technical individuals. But I would love to communicate in some way to healthcare in general that don't require that quality person to be a nurse. Look at the value that an engineer can bring in to the quality team. It's a completely different view. But when you look at, I just tested for the certified professional in healthcare quality with the National Association with Healthcare Quality, and everything in their quality manual is industry best practice. I'm like, wow, I already know this stuff. I don't even have to study that hard. So, they see the value of what engineers and other quality industries have brought in, and that's what they're using. Yet somehow the message hasn't gotten out that we need more engineers in those quality positions. So that's one thing I would love to change more than anything, is just to help healthcare in general see the value of some of these technical degrees, technical education.
Yeah, it's a good call out, and I think highlights another sort of force vector, right, on the system, which has to do with the way that companies envision creating value. There's still a very heavy, like Ubermensch philosophy in a lot of organizations. There's still like a top-down authoritarian, this is the guy type of thing. Well, if you're thinking that way, you might very well require a nursing degree from your quality person, right? Because the buck stops here. But what if you had a team instead, right? I mean, you can't play football with one guy, right?
Yeah.
You got to have a quarterback and a wide receiver. You got to have linemen and everybody else involved in the play, right? Even the coaches. How many coaches are there for an NFL team? Like 17, you know, because they all have different specialties, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way, if organizations, are able to sort of transcend their culture, their 1980s B school education, or whatever is going into their decision-making process, to think differently and outside the box, we'll just team two people up, right? Your engineer's your guardrail for really the technical side of process management, and the nurse is the guardrail on the other side. So hire two people, or don't hire them, right? You probably have to hire the engineer. You probably don't already have one of those on your staff, but utilize a team. Think differently about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The team approach is definitely important because you get those different perspectives, and there are so many different perspectives that you can approach quality from. It's interesting because I mentioned earlier this patient safety reporting system that we use, and this is, anybody can put in any kind of report, and you get all kinds of mix of reports. Some people trying to throw somebody under the bus, or some real issue. We get a mix of everything. But I've had a lot of people push back saying, you can't really manage this system. And I'm thinking, well, why can't I? And the only thing I can think of is, they're basically saying, you're not a nurse, you're not a clinical person. And so we don't want you, closing out these reports, maybe inappropriately. But in my mind, this is one of the ways that I take advantage of that team approach is I don't do the investigation. I assign it to a nurse or to a lab tech or to an x-ray tech or whoever that expert is based on the issue that we're seeing. And then I have to trust them that they're closing it out properly. And then I can take my outside view and make other decisions with that. But absolutely, we have way too many issues going on. There's no one person, whether that's a doctor or a nurse or anybody else, that's really going to understand it all. Nobody's the subject matter expert of everything. And so we have to take that team approach.
Yep, good word. Well, Clinton, we really appreciate you joining us today on Equality Podcast. We are running out of time. So real quick, tell folks how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so you can connect with me through LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. I don't even remember my LinkedIn tag. Probably should have looked at it.
All right.
We'll put it down. We'll put it down below.
Down
right
below.
there.
And, yeah.
Appreciate that. But I love to connect. I love to discuss all things performance improvement, all things systems thinking. I get into philosophy quite often. And so LinkedIn is a great platform for all those great discussions. But love to connect. Please reach out, and look forward to some conversations.
And thank you for putting up with my BS on there. Thank you very much.
I feel like we're going to have a lot of interesting conversations. I appreciate the time and the depth of the conversation. For everybody out there in YouTube land, thank you for joining the Equality Podcast. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
PDCA, 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 PDCA.